You ever get that feeling, like the smallest thing you ignore becomes the beginning of something you can't put back in a box? Tonight, I want to tell you 3 true stories from my life that all started with a tiny, easy-to-dismiss sign. Each one left me quieter, jumpier, a little less secure in the world I thought I knew. They're all true. They're all mine. And yes, by the end, you might be speechless. You might be shaken. Would you have noticed what I didn't? I'm not here to scare you for the sake of it. I'm telling you what happened, how it felt, and what it did to me. If you like true scary stories or you want to understand how ordinary moments spiral into something else, stick around. If this lands with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Story 1. Winter Camping with Roscoe. I wanted to be alone, not lonely, alone on purpose. There's a certain clarity to being the only warm thing in a wide, cold place. I packed my tent, my bag, and my dog, Roscoe, a big, stubborn Labrador mix who thinks the world is better when it's noisy. It was late winter. The ground was hard, the kind of snow that bites when wind hits it. I picked a remote patch of state forest because I needed the kind of quiet you can only find when there's no one else around to hear the trees. The first evening was what I expected: rusty light, the scent of damp wood, Roscoe sleeping by my feet in the tent while I ate something that tasted like camping food and drank coffee that was better because I'd made it. I remember how the air felt, clean, sharp, as if it could cut the small petty worries right out of you. I liked that feeling. I needed it. Around midnight I woke to Roscoe's ears perked up. He was looking at the tent wall, low growl rumbling in his chest. That sound was never casual. I unzipped the door a crack and peered out. The trees were black silhouettes, long branches like hands. The snow on the ground had underglow from the moon, no footprints close by, only where we'd walked in and where I'd made a small circle around the camp. And then I noticed the sound, not like wind, not like an animal. Footsteps. Distant, soft, too human to be anything else. I called out, thinking maybe another camper, but the voice that answered was not a reply. It was a man's voice, very close to the tree line, low and flat. "What are you doing out here?" he said. Not curious, not friendly. It had edge. Roscoe barked once, short, sharp, and then stopped, listening. I thought about my options. The truth is I had a gun in my pack, something I carried because this was the wilderness and not everything out here is polite. I slid my hand to it, felt the leather, the weight of a small but real responsibility. I didn't want to use it. The man's voice said, "Nothing more." Footsteps faded into the trees. You learn how your mind fills in blanks at times like that. The forest could make every sound mean something worse, but the next night, on a loop I hadn't heard before, someone walked around our campsite. The crunch of snow circled us, closer and then farther, like a slow, annoying metronome. Roscoe, who was normally content to sleep through a thunderstorm, hardly blinked. He stood, hackles up, and paced like he wanted to put himself between me and whatever was there. I shoved my hand in my pocket, found my lighter, and that small human action did something. It made me feel braver for a second. When a figure stepped into the thin moonlight near the tree line, half hidden by the trees, I could see him, a silhouette. A man in dark clothing, moving with a caution that told me he'd been watching. He came toward the tent and stopped a few yards away, hands in his pockets. He asked again, this time closer, "Why are you here?" His tone had a flavor to it, hostile, like someone annoyed at being interrupted. I answered as plainly as I could. I told him I was camping, that the area was public. He didn't smile. He stepped back, melting into the shadows. I don't want to make a liar out of how dangerous my own imagination can be, but there was something in the way he moved that didn't sit right. It was the way his head tilted once like he was measuring me. The way Roscoe kept his stance like he knew this man could mean trouble. He disappeared, then returned hours later to circle the tent. I could hear it as something close to a whisper against the fabric, soft footfalls that paused as if listening. The hair on my arms stood up. I cocked the gun, not to shoot, but so I knew it was ready. Saying it aloud wain't bravado. It was me trying to feel like I had a choice. The night pressed on. At one point, the footsteps stopped right outside the tent, and for a 6 seconds I imagined the man putting his hand on the fabric and just standing there, like he was making sure we were real. I shouted, louder than I meant to. I said something I hoped would be enough, that the campsite was claimed, that any police would not be pleased, that more people were no good. I don't know if it scared him, or if somewhere deep he just didn't want attention. He slipped back. The snow made no other sound. At dawn, I packed like a person with a plan. I didn't sleep well. Roscoe was by my side, eyes tired and patient in the way dogs are when they forgive us for worrying. I left fast, not dramatic, but deliberate. Take down the tent, push the straps tight, hollow my shoulders against the day. When I drove off, the forest felt like it had swallowed something with our leaving. I haven't been back to that patch of trees since. What stayed with me was not the not-quite confrontation, but the way small warnings, Roscoe's growl, a half glimpse at the tree line, footsteps stacked together until I had to act. Alone in the snow, small things aren't small. They are the scaffolding of fear. That was the first time I realized I couldn't ignore the little things. If you like true, scary stories, or you want to make sure you don't miss the next one, consider subscribing. I'll keep telling the ones that won't let me sleep. Story 2. The Man in the Wedding Suit. The next story is different. It's not about isolation in the woods. It's about being surrounded. It took place on a July 4th weekend in Charleston. Fireworks, crowded streets. A friend named Mark, who is the kind of guy who laughs at my worst paranoia. We were there for a long weekend, daytime market stalls, a ghost tour that felt part tour, part performance, and a stretch of night when the city looked like the inside of a postcard. Early on, it felt routine, sun, salt air, the clatter of tourists and vendors. Mark was a constant of reassurance. He'd roll his eyes at me for being watchful and then do the exact same thing when he felt uneven. I like to think of him as a reasonable counterpoint to the part of me that expects the worst. The first time I saw him, call him the man in the wedding suit, I thought maybe it was a wedding party or someone overdressed for a summer afternoon. He was wearing a perfectly white jacket, a crisp bow tie, hair dark and curled slightly at the temples, shoes that were clean enough to be new. He moved through people with a strange detachment, like he existed on a different plane of attention than everyone else. People flowed around him like water, avoiding a rock. There was a lethargy to his stride, and yet he never seemed to be slowed by anyone brushing past him. He should have been invisible, like the rest of us, but he seemed out of sync. From a distance I nudged Mark. "Do you see that man?" He looked and shrugged. "That's Mark. If he can laugh off a thing, he will." We carried on. Later, at the waterfront market, as fireworks began to smoke in the distant sky, I spotted him again down an alley where there was no reason to be. How had he gotten from the market to that alley without being noticed? I asked myself if maybe I'd lost time in the crowd, if he'd actually been there all along. But this felt different. That evening, we were part of a small group on a ghost tour. The guide's voice made the banal sound eerie. Lanterns swung, shadows made the brick walls breathe. People joked about finding ghosts on the tour, like you might collect magnets. I was paying attention to the stories, and I admit to the people around me. Then I saw him, standing at the edge of the group, just beyond where the light reached. He was closer than the alley, closer than the market. He wasn't taking part. He wasn't looking at the guide. He was looking at something else, something I couldn't see. "Mark," I said later, pointing with my chin. "That same man." Mark squinted. "Maybe he's in a historical reenactment," he offered. His voice was soft, the voice of someone trying to keep things normal, but there was a hardness underneath it now, an edge. We both felt it. He showed up in places where he shouldn't have been seen twice, and yet was. at a corner market, 2 blocks from where we'd been, standing at a doorway on King Street as we walked by, eyes turning to glance back at us as if he had just remembered something. Once, late at night when the streetlights made puddles of light, he paused at the far end of our block, then crossed the street and moved away as if he had only meant to test whether he could. The thing that made it worse was how no one else seemed to register him. People brushed past him, vendors never called him out. In the crush of the city, a man could be lost in a crowd. This man did not blend. He was like a thread in a tapestry that refused to stay woven. A moment that has etched itself in my memory happened back at the guest house where Mark and I were staying. I'd gone to the window to close the blinds, something small and ordinary, and there he was, just outside, in the little alley behind the building. He hadn't made a sound. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, then he turned, vanished behind the building like a fold of shadow. I felt my chest compress with a feeling I can only call wrong. Why would he be there? Why look back once like that? Later that night we sat on the porch and listened to distant fireworks dying. There was a tap on the window, soft, polite, like someone knocking on the wrong door expecting to be let in. I froze. Mark, finally catching my attention, stood up and pulled the blinds back. Nothing. The alley was empty. We could hear someone talking far down the street, laughing at something else entirely. We walked out to see if we could catch a glimpse, to prove to ourselves it was nothing. As we turned the corner into the narrow alley, I saw him for a last time, moving down into another alley, his bow tie catching the streetlight for half a second. He turned a corner and was gone. No confrontation, no harm, just a profound, uncanny awareness that someone had been tracking the edges of where I'd been. Mark, who had made jokes earlier, didn't laugh then. I could tell the feeling had reached him in a way it hadn't before. We left Charleston the next day, with the fireworks still sticking to the sky in our memory. The man in the wedding suit became the thing we couldn't talk about without pausing. We tried to rationalize. Maybe he was in a bridal party, maybe an actor, but the recurrence, the way he moved through the crowd unlike anyone else, and that last glance outside my window made logic feel insufficient. Sometimes the uncanny is not a threat you can point at. It's a presence that makes a city feel less like a safe, known place, and more like a space with corners you don't control. Mark and I replayed the weekend for months. It lodged in the back of my head, like a noise that never quite stopped. I thought that was odd. I thought nothing would top it. The third story would prove me wrong. Story 3. The Basement Trespasser. This is the one that changed how I live in my own home, the one that taught me that the smallest domestic oddities can be the most terrifying. It was ordinary, until it stopped being ordinary. It started with little things. A charger unplugged from the wall in the kitchen the morning after I'd gone to bed. At first I shrugged it off. Maybe the cat had kicked it. Maybe I'd done it when I'd stumbled in half asleep. Then a porch light that was always on one night came on later than usual, as if someone had decided when it would burn. Small, odd, but explainable. Maybe I was being hyper-vigilant after the camping thing. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. Then there were the footprints, muddy, partially wiped near the back door. Not neat prints, but smudged shadows on the floor that said someone had been inside and had tried to tell you they hadn't. The kind of mark that makes the ordinary house smell different, like something private was invaded. A small series of scratches marred the wood around the lock on the back door. Shallow grooves, like someone had tried to work the latch or check if it would hold. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make me call a locksmith. The locksmith was a practical, brisk man who replaced the deadbolt and made polite conversation while testing the new mechanism. He recommended a more secure lock and suggested we reinforce the frame. I took the steps because it felt right to do something, and for a while it helped, the way sealing a window can ease a worry. But that comfort was brittle. One night I woke to a sound like a chair being nudged. The house was quiet except for a faint tapping on the bedroom door. soft, patient. I told myself it was a tree branch, a raccoon, someone in the neighborhood. I put on the bedside lamp, got up, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The back stairs leading down to the basement were slightly ajar. I told myself I must have left them like that. I put my foot on the steps and felt the wood cool and sighed and closed it. A week later, I woke to the unmistakable sensation that I was being watched. My phone had been moved, unplugged next to the couch. The charger lay coiled on the floor like a small, deliberate sign. The door to the basement was cracked open an inch and a half. I froze. My whole body knew what to do and what not to do at once. I didn't go down. I left the house. I sat in my car for a long time, breath loud in the confined space, and called the police. The dispatcher's voice was steady, professional. She asked questions I remember only in pieces. Officers arrived, methodical. They searched the house, checked locks, took notes. They told me to stay with a neighbor while they double-checked everything. I could hear the sirens and the quiet clack of boots on my porch, like punctuation marks to my disbelief. Later, a few hours after the initial sweep, an officer found an outline in the basement, the shape of a person who had been living or sleeping down in the shadows, behind the furnace where the air was dry and warm. They pulled him out. He was barefoot, thin, and had been inside for unknown hours. They led him up the stairs like he was a man who had been sleeping in someone else's life. I watched through the kitchen window as officers guided him into the back of a cruiser. They told me they'd found a makeshift sleeping area and some personal items. I was told to expect follow-up, to consider changing locks, to get additional security if I could. A lockdown of routine advice. The truth was, I felt hollowed out. What made it worse wasn't just that someone had been in my house. It was the evidence of watching. They found a photo on my phone, a picture taken in the middle of the night of me sleeping. The timestamp read 3:11 a.m. It was a photograph of my own vulnerability, taken from somewhere inside my house. I remember the cold twist of seeing myself through someone else's lens, clumsy, asleep, unaware. It's an image that has replayed itself in my head with merciless clarity. How long had it been on his phone? Why take that picture? Was it a souvenir, proof, or something worse? The police told me they arrested him. They said they suspected stalking. I don't know what the legal outcome was beyond that. Indefinido, where the paperwork takes over the story. But I know the immediate aftermath. I moved out for a little while, shrinking my life down to a few suitcases and a friend's guest room. I changed the locks. I installed new lights. I bought motion sensors and put them where I could. I did the things people recommend, because you do anything to feel less naked in your own home. But the deepest changes weren't about locks or lights. They were about what I noticed in the dark. I started checking doors 3 times. Basements became foreign places, full of corners that could hide more than boxes. I could not stand at the top of the stairs and look down without feeling like someone could be waiting there, like breath on the back of your neck. The police were patient and careful and professional. They told me what they could tell me, but the simple fact remained. Someone had been in my house while I slept. Someone had been close enough to take a picture of me that said, without words, I could be reached. I felt stupid for a long time, like I should have known, should have seen the signs earlier. But the truth is, the signs were small and ordinary at first. A charger unplugged, a light off, a smear on the floor. No one who knows your life wants to believe it's being watched. And that's what made it so effective, stealth. The invader didn't burst through doors. He crept. He undermined my confidence in the place that is supposed to be safe. In the months that followed, I had trouble with basements. I would hesitate at the top of stairs, hand hovering over the rail. I licensed myself to be cautious in a way that sometimes felt excessive and sometimes necessary. I learned to trust my unease, like a tool. I stopped telling the story to people who wanted to make me feel brave for being scared. Instead, I told it to friends who listened and to the officers who came and took notes. We found out, even if only in part, that he had been in the house multiple times. The photograph on my phone with the 3:11 a.m. timestamp remained one of those small horrors that is both proof and a wound. It's impossible to unsee your vulnerability in someone else's archive. I was left with a weird, permanent silhouette on my memory. We often think that danger is dramatic, a struggle, a shout, a scene from a movie. But this was different. It was quiet. It was careful. It was a slow corrosion of trust. The police did what they could. The locksmith reinforced hinges. Friends offered couches and coffee and practical help. Yet the aftermath was a kind of trauma that didn't look like a bruise. It was how I walked through my house, how I slept, how I looked at doors. Reflection and epilogue. 3 stories, 3 different settings, different modes of vulnerability. In the woods, I was alone and exposed in a place that felt clear and honest. There the warning signs were animal. Roscoe's growl, the distant footsteps. The man at the tree line made me confront my own illusion that solitude is safe. In the city I was surrounded, and yet somehow more exposed, because the uncanny can hide in a crowd. The man in the wedding suit showed up where crowds should have dissolved anomalies. He taught me that being among people doesn't automatically make you safer. In my house, someone had chipped away at the borders of the place I take for granted as mine. The unlocked charger, the scratch marks, the photograph at 3:11 a.m., all the small things that stacked into something that stole the ordinary from me. What ties these stories together is not the outcome. No one was physically harmed in the ways you'd imagine from horror movies. What ties them together is the pattern. An ignored, small, plausible thing becomes proof. A noise you think is nothing. A person you think is harmless. A loose charger you think you unplugged. Each of those are plausible, easy explanations. That's the point. If the smallest things weren't plausible, we'd notice every danger. But because they are ordinary, they slip by. And by the time we realize, the situation has escalated. I don't tell you this to make you paranoid. I tell you this because when small things repeat, when detail accumulates in a way that suggests a pattern, it's worth paying attention. There's a difference between fear that shrinks you and caution that keeps you intact. Learning that line, how to listen to instinct without living in constant alarm, is one of the harder things I've had to learn. A question I keep asking myself is the same one I'm asking you now. What would you have done? Would you have left the woods at the first strange voice? Would you have followed the man in the wedding suit to see where he went? Would you have waited in your bed while there were muddy prints near the door? There is no single right answer. Hindsight gives the luxury of clarity. In the moment, you do what feels like the smallest risk to keep you safe. If these stories left you shaken, you're not wrong for feeling that. They left me quieter in ways that mattered. They taught me to trust that low, unsettled feeling. They taught me to act when the ordinary starts to feel crooked. If one of these actually kept you up tonight, tell me which one in the comments. If you're new here, hit subscribe. There are more stories I've carried that I still need to tell, and if you've had something similar happen, I'd like to hear it. Not to compare scars, but to remember we're not alone in being watched by the small things. Be careful out there. Notice the little signs. Don't let them accumulate. And if something about your life feels off, don't be ashamed to act on it. The world doesn't always make sense, but paying attention is a kind of armor. Thanks for listening.